I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
President, we would like to thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. We heard quite a lot of heuristics from her, but we didn't hear the main thing from her. Of course, a condemnation of a violation of international law by the United States and the UK. We'd like to thank the Guyanese presidency for swiftly convening today's meeting of the UN Security Council under threats to international peace and security, which we initiated in order to discuss another unlawful and irresponsible act of the United States in the region of the Middle East against the backdrop of an escalation of violence in the Palestinian-Israel conflict zone with an unprecedented number of casualties, in support of which Washington is playing far from a secondary role. On the night from the 2nd to the 3rd of February, the US, using 4 tactical bombers of the US Air Force, F-16s, and 2 supersonic strategic bombers, B-1B Lancers, carried out by order of President Joe Biden no less than 85 so-called retaliation strikes on the territory of sovereign Iraq and Syria. The mass airstrikes of American air forces, as a result of which civilians and soldiers died, caused the destruction and damage of tens of facilities. And this demonstrates once again to the entire world the aggressive nature of US policy in the Middle East and the full disregard of Washington for norms of international law. The participation in the US attacks of the UK RAF should give no one the illusion that there is some sort of international coalition in place. London still has to respond for its zealous support of serious provocational attacks of its big brother in Washington, and also the ongoing attacks against Yemen. The actions of the Anglo-Saxons pose a direct threat to international peace and security. They undermine the world order based on the primacy of universal international law and the central role of the United Nations. Perhaps this kind of mob-like action is part of the so-called rules-based order. And in its recent interview, the former Australian ambassador to Iran, John Lender, said it is, and I quote, a set of ever-changing, ever-shifting rules developed by the United States in the interests of the United States and their Western allies, end of quote, adding that, quote, one of the hardest things in the rules-based order is identifying what the rules are, end of quote. Inasmuch the US and its allies benefit from this order, and they advocate for it, using it to justify including their strikes in Iraq and Syria, it's becoming ever clearer that this has very little to this American pseudo-legal construct has little to do with international law. President, it's clear that American airstrikes are specifically, deliberately aimed to stoke the conflict, and that they targeted positions of the Syrian Arab Republic army in the east of the country, mainly in the province of Deir ez-Zor, where the Syrian army continue to fight against the remaining ISIL fighters who Washington, through their statements, are covering for and tutoring. There are endlessly attacking in recent times targets allegedly of pro-Iran groups in Iraq and Syria. The US is trying to expand this regional conflict to biggest countries in the Middle East. At the same time, the US Central Command representative saying that the so-called operation was coordinated with the authorities of Iraq. However, in the statement of the Iraqi authorities, the US activities were called another brazen aggression and a violation of the sovereignty of Iraq. And the information of Washington on alleged coordination of strikes with Baghdad is a deliberate lie focused on skewing public opinion and shirking legal responsibility. It's clear that the presence of the international anti-ISIL coalition led by the US in the Republic has been a threat to security and stability in the country, and also attempt to involve it in regional and international conflicts. Washington, enjoying its impunity, continues to sow chaos and destruction in the Middle East. The biggest air operation of the US in the region since 2003 presented by Joe Biden as an act of retaliation for an attack of the use of UAVs of unconfirmed origin on the American base that is illegally in Syria has no justification. We see in these attempts to flex muscles, mainly to try and implement the domestic political situation in America, to justify and salvage the image of the current American administration in the international arena in the light of the upcoming and presidential pre-election campaign. And also the fact that these acts could lead to a further escalation of international tensions and led to the deaths of civilians is not of concern to Washington strategists. President, the recent events confirm that the US is not looking for and has never sought in reality a solution to the problems in the region. The logic of their actions should be found only in their efforts at any price to preserve their dominating position in the world. Therefore, Washington has tried and will continue to try to fight fire with fire and compound the chronic disagreements in the Middle East to such an extent where it is a benefit for their Israeli ally. Trusting on any good sense from the American establishment and the readiness to take into account the interests of the countries in the region is something that is pointless. On the 2nd and the 3rd of February, we were able to see this once again. We decisively condemn this new brazen act of aggression of the US against a sovereign state, creating further risks and increasing the level of instability in a region that is already on fire. And it is clear that this incident, which we are here discussing today, only increases regional tensions caused by unprecedented violence in Gaza, which for 4 months has been suffering from an inhumane, bloody operation of Israel, who the US is covering through all their efforts, as well as their satellites, including blocking efforts of the Security Council to impose an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Ultimately, we can clearly see that escalation of violence has already gone far beyond the occupied Palestinian territories, crossing not only the border between Israel and Lebanon, but also into the Red Sea and Yemen. It's clear that unilateral acts of violence by Washington and their allies only worsen the chaos in the region, nullifying international efforts to re-establish peace in the Middle East and to find a just solution to the Palestinian question. We call on the international community to unequivocally condemn these senseless acts of Washington and its allies in the Middle East, which violate the sovereignty of Iraq and the Syrian Arab Republic. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement.